Part 1. Gnolminej. A tome, or for easier understanding, a book, as another contained prophecy, put down and placed individually by leather, strapped in, tethered, and bound. And perhaps in this instruction all life might be bewitched, or written as the most factual belief similarly. A warning yet again devised by a counter to some other, and open readings of one's own demise by regretfully glancing upon sorrow's pages at this book's sole copy. Honestly, sense contained within, lurks the uncovering of one's own voice within head, releasing demons upon this earth. So be warned, since the faint of heart may be hurt by this engagement. Happenstance especially, if they are not prepared. Otherwise, for the strategically important, strong personalities, one can only hope that this offering guide counter might help such a mind along a path towards better understanding of how to beat any said released demons upon this world. A secret manuscript boasted writing in any form, within held ancient language of symbols so descriptive in their characterization, they perhaps could just drive someone asinine insane. Perfection of characters swirling around like the letter S in Sanskrit especially, except all the letterings would mimic swishing patterns with little dots as extensions. So beautiful was each word, except they would not be combined, and between certain spaces were betterings. As I cannot read, I dare not care to understand each, and especially because it specifically was not boxy such as the Hebrew alphabet. Besides the way, to cross formalities, how about explain to you specifically how each page may contain a certain powerful drawing of some ancient being or even deity, which could even pop from the page and emit a presence like another, such as something undescribed in its ability to be otherworldly and acting out. I kid you not, every gliding, stitching together of these artistically crafted wordings are combined to make something extraordinary like deification. Like deification in a trip on substance, the affecting aspect in performing, this teaching will exploit the senses and the mind, bettering the abilities of said individual until demiurging is complete. Because if you can read this book without letting the strange strength of strong holding effects take a hold on your despair, I assure you greater livelihood of the existence will be granted upon one's listening in of one's own. An eternity of life will also be granted after one's preceding passings, regardless of rather which the listening in failed to properly correspond with one's spirit, and unfortunately the spirituality declined and led into the failings of your stigma, leading to the inner sanctum's collapse of one's sorry psyche. Guarding the way down in referencing what the unconscious cannot predict. I insist something upon everything for you if you read within what may also be called a story. Not me, but everyone, including yourself. And I assure you, for better or worse, while guiding one's own light or masculinity, one's minuscule insignificance and their own indifference may be conquered towards therefore of lack of into loss of self-sufficiency or power. Empowering oneself instead to face the loss of life and engage into something, I insist, since the unbearable without the illumination of the book, of life not death in its own words. So beware, since no other is owned in performing ritualisms until now, I'm certain. Of nothing and or anything this world or therefore before has to offer. So go now and set forth and understand my sweet religion. Chapter 1. Into the wildwoods you and I go. Another missed opportunity as I let my life slip through my fingers. Preoccupied with my own private world, I was too afraid to reach out and ever find something besides myself. It had the potential to be perfect. I could tell when someone else was trapped, and yet I didn't do a thing. Like I had spent my whole life a day ahead of some other. That somewhere along the line, I'd pushed another back and went ahead. So I was always isolated, forever searching for the specific person I had lost. I would never match whenever I met another with missing time. It would never be mine. I was unable to reach back and pull myself to the present day, like I was setting the events and someone else was living them. Every time I thought I had found who I was ahead of, it was always a mismatch. I had forgotten mine somewhere far away, long ago in the past. I was by the water. I had escaped the woodland trail and was out on the open and on the beach. The place was entirely used up, the water unclean, dirty every inch. Trash and dead birds floated on the surface. Specifically for every 100 or so large pieces of trash, at least one dead bird. A seabird flown in from sea, seeking refuge from flight, by landing in a place long forgotten and dead. The ocean was diseased, but nothing compared to this. From old magazines I had seen pictures of lake shores, and they looked beautiful. Nothing like this. Where reeds, lily pads, and other freshwater plants once infested, they were instead replaced by floating trash. The trash covered every square inch of water out at least 100 yards. Everything goes downward in due time with the presence of gravity, and the trash was no exception. Old glaciers must have created this lakebed long ago, carving out rivers as it receded. At least a dozen or so large rivers leading into this medium-sized lake, and from a long-time collapse of organized and functional government, trash from places along these rivers now reached a point of rest, lapping up against the water's edge by the tips of my feet. I looked out and could see where most of the trash stopped and could see the open water. I noticed living birds floating out far in the water but could never reach them. Human beings can be so tranquil sometimes. I was cursed by the breakaway, always trying to recover. And most normal people were cursed by trying to find their emotional middle ground. The collective would always move from complete calm to viscera in a mere moment. It reminded me of the water as I watched it move together and ripple. I removed a bottle floating along the water's edge as I walked and scanning for anything of value. The necklace floating in the crystal clean liquid was inside. Little bubbles coated the walls of the clear glass and rose to the surface as I removed it, sending a slight ripple through the water and trash. I heard the voices of women before 4 dogs broke through the underbrush, tails between legs as they halted to a stop, their feet sensing the change in texture of the earth below. They were at the end of the trail, where it led out at the edge of the woods, where the mud met the beach sand. I had moved far down along the windy beach at this point and managed to take refuge behind some fallen trees, still rooted at the top of the beach. They must have gone too tall and top-heavy for the constant erosion, leaving their front-rooted trunk vulnerable to the sinking into the beach. Their back-end roots were pulled out of the loose clay-based soil where the sand met the embankment of mud. It was high tide, leaving no trouble for me to quickly move behind the fallen trees and ducking low before the dogs had a chance to sense the new area. I was far enough away from them to look like little footstools. I couldn't tell the breeds exactly. The first one appeared larger than the rest. Some mutt, probably part pit. The last one was also quite large, but was missing a back leg. Part Doberman, maybe. The middle 2 looked like chocolate lab mixes. They all had short hair. I watched them settle down and quickly adjust to their surroundings. Their heads moved in my direction, smelling the air, but they seemed uninterested. They turned their attention back to the end of the trail as the woman appeared. Not all at once, for it's a large girl in every way, just one of those people who are naturally bigger. Probably my height, maybe 6 feet tall, although that could be pushing it. Not especially round, you wouldn't find many people like that anymore, especially this far from anywhere. Obviously well-fed, she had more muscle mass than myself and contained a visible belly. The woman that immediately followed was also tall, visibly pregnant with an otherwise salamander slender figure. The final woman was younger than me, and probably still in her teenage years. The other 2 could be still considered young adults, maybe pushing 30. She was much more cautious than the first 2 who had left the brush, appearing similar to the dogs. She was small, probably from nourishment issues from youth, not genetics. I didn't pay much attention to her out of instinct. She wasn't alert enough to catch my attention for more than 30 seconds. I made a dash for the undergrowth as I checked their immediate surroundings, looking around briefly before turning back towards the trail opening as an older gentleman appeared with what looked like to be a sharpened wooden walking stick. 2 more men appeared, along with a little boy. They were carrying fishing gear. I was curious how they planned on fishing in this water till they made it further down the beach, luckily in an opposite direction to where I was tucked away. I climbed up a hill that overlooked much of the beach and found my way through the undergrowth to the edge of a rocky cliff face and settled in. I was high above where the dogs could hopefully reach. The wind would carry my smell above them. The breeze was coming from the ocean, so I was practically hidden up in the air. None of them have any belongings, which seemed odd. Stuff was hard to come by, but usually a group this size would have more. I didn't have much either, nothing to defend myself with, so I wasn't going to risk an interaction. There must have been an encampment nearby where they lived. Maybe there would be more people. One of the women, the lankier one, the older man, and the boy got into the boat and waded out through the trash into the open water, while the others scavenged for trash for useful items. That's what I had been doing for 3 days, trying to find things I could bring with me back into town to sell. I didn't want to start begging, so I left in a hurry after hearing rumors about this place. It was a miracle so much garbage could end up in one spot. I decided to leave. There were dots in my vision. Earlier I had scared with one of the dogs. It had wandered off far from the group and looked right up at me. Still a ways off, and although at some level its senses were guiding it correctly, the conscious part of the animal must have decided that whatever blue had caught its attention wasn't trying it, or the rest of the pack would have interest in it. I was dehydrated, so I made a fire and found a stream to collect fresh water. I walked along in a blur. The woods were so old the undergrowth wasn't much to worry about. I had gone over multiple streams on the way and while walking the trail. At some point the trail must have been graveled or had stones put down. Most trails with inconsistent use had disappeared at this point. All the bridges were in ruin. The wood had rotted away long ago, but each stream was no trouble crossing. I just had to walk and I wouldn't run into one eventually. The days were warm and the air was dry, so lighting a fire would be easy. I wanted to do it before night, boil just enough water to fill my 5 bottles and be on the way. I remember what I had picked up before running off. I had forgot about it while holding it in my hand. I stopped to take time to understand what I had found. I was tempted to drink the water because it was so clean looking. The tiny pockets of air still coated the glass, and even under the darkness of the canopy, the water still seemed to be sparkling. It must have been a trick of the light. Inside there was an old pendant, probably cast iron. It was ovular with symbols jutting in and out. Whoever made it must have known what they were doing. The cast would have been carved into to create the shape, carving out around the engravings, then deeper into the oval, creating the cast that would leave symbols going both into the pendant and jutting out. I ran my fingers along the symbols. There was some language maybe. I had no idea what they were, but encompassed the eye, catch in the middle, which was a winding snake or serpent of some sort, maybe an eel, engraven with such fine detail that the craftsmanship was almost inhuman. At each bend of its body were squares, with more symbols engraven within so small I could make them out through the water. The whole thing looked like some sort of ancient artifact that no human hand could create. The work was too fine. I continued walking until I found the stream. The water was attractive, so I let some flow into my pot and boiled it after starting a fire. I cooled the water in the stream bed after it boiled and poured it into a bottle. I gathered more, brought it to a boil, and cooked more of the grain I had been subsisting off for about a week. I continued to boil more water after eating. I needed to find better food soon. During in-betweens, I would sit on a fallen tree. It probably came down during winter, then picked up the pendant submerged in the glass bottle. I had been an old beaten-up cord going through the hole in the top end. It was probably some sort of leather, but it looked like not a strip, but a rounded edge cord. It was probably slimy from the sun cooking it through the glass as it floated out in water for days. The pendant seemed much too large to fit through the bottle opening, but this may have been a trick of the light. I shattered the glass against the stream bed where parts were no longer submerged in running water. During the summer, most mountain snow melted and found its way into the lake or deep underground. Some might be back in the clouds, being carried away far away. What came out of the broken glass looked like a liquid darker than which came from the lake. It flooded and dispersed between the rocks and into the running water like a black dye and diluted away, lost, hidden with the rest of the water. The necklace was gone. It had liquefied with the shattering of the glass, turning the clear liquid dark before being carried away. The water was boiling over, so I got back and picked up the pot without thinking, and the handle, through the covered and insulating material, still burned my hand. I quickly dropped the pot in the fire. The boiling water hissed as it interacted with the doused flames, casting out ash and sputtered by the movement of water down to the earth below. The damaged fire wasn't out, and I quickly kicked the pot out of the flame and moved it over the mud and down into the stream bed below. It hissed as it met the moving water and quickly cooled. I picked it up, filled it with water, and brought it back to the struggling fire before starting the process over. I got excessively hydrated, filled up each bottle, and moved over to some larger rock to find a place to sleep after I extinguished the fire. I found a nice divot between boulders close to the stream. The earth was soft with a layer of sand up top. The space was perfect body-size fit. I settled into the earth, mostly hidden from the sight in the divot, and fell off into sleep. I woke up backwards but didn't notice. I was always sore and groggy right after I woke up. I stood up without bothering to knock the sand off myself and set off again before the sun could even begin to reach the sky. The woods were dark around me. Everything tinted a dark blue. I walked in the reverse direction from which I came, trying to find my ways back to the water's edge. I hadn't actually moved that far into the woods before finding the stream and assumed it would be smarter to make my way back to the beach, take the trail, rather than rely on my navigational senses to guide me towards the road I came in on. That, and I wanted at least the least amount of risk moving through the undergrowth I can manage so as to not accidentally damage my legs, trying to find my way back into the vacant light of the early morning hours. I managed to find my beach and dropped down to the water's edge. The tide was now out, and although I didn't move by much, I was still happy being less restricted, being able to move farther along down the edge of the woods, as I was tempted to scan the trash again as I walked the edge of the water, but the shadows shrouded all fine detail. Like the creeping hand moving up the skirt of the woman I had let out to have a night to enjoy herself with friends, strangers, drinks, and anything else available, too incapacitated to avoid being quartered and predated by a stranger of the night, alone in some ancient, tired, and torn booth, abandoned by the others that were slowly picked off to be held in similar situations by similar men, one at a time, maybe friends in circumstance or lifestyle. I come up to the mound. I didn't want to fully understand what I was staring at. I only got less certain I could fully describe what was being unshrouded before me as I approached until I was right up against it. Her belly was agape, torn open from below the ribcage down to below the belt line. Her clothes were mostly and still intact and on. The bottom section of her shirt had been torn away, and her jacket was still open around her arms. Her pants and underwear had been torn at places around her waist, and now she was lying on their ripped remains. The pant sleeves were still intact and still around her legs. Her feet were missing. Her hands were missing. Her internal organs were mostly missing, and her baby was missing. She was the slender woman I had noticed from the day before. I took a step back and wandered around the body as I continued forward. The look on her face wasn't awful. Large chunks of her hair were missing and swells of blood. I didn't notice anything else as I eyed it and kept a distance as I semicircled around it before walking up closer to the trailhead. The birds had yet to notice it, although the shellfish had. The birds began their feast at sunrise, last and some larger scavenger inevitably appeared, laying claim to the entire corpse. I didn't notice any overt signs of struggle, indicating what could have happened. I wasn't going to get any nearer to continue to look at it. I moved closer and closer to the exit path out of the mirror world found on the beach, and the last thing I noticed were the shattered remains of the boat they had taken out yesterday far down the beach. Halfway up to the tree line, I shivered as a wave shot out of me from the broken vessel. The shiver removed me from my body, leaving out my back as I fell into the shroud of the trail opening. A noise that combined the shrill call of a seabird with the distressed howl whimpered out from a dog, carried through a human body, hit me in the back, sending whatever life that had been knocked out towards the corpse back into my person, pushing me forwards all the way out through the woods to the broken roads I first came in on. My gaze was at my feet as I walked the roadway. The cement was dry and cracked, no longer maintained. Very few vehicles could venture off the dirt roads and back onto the cement. Only people can now use the old roadways. A day's walk back to town, and I was carrying a lot of weight, mostly happy with what I had found. I had pulled an abundance of scrap metal, dissecting various trashed equipment after finishing them from the water, along with cords, old wiring, hooks, screws, and a rusty toolbox with various tools. A total of 2 bags full of various things, the large satchel bag on my side, and a backpack on my stomach. On my back I kept a mountaineer's backpacker's framed bag. The weight was unbearable and especially hurt my shoulders. The bottom layer of the 3 bag straps across my shoulders was the backpacking bag, helping to redistribute weight to my waist and back. So I climbed, walking slowly, making ground. It would take some time moving along these winding mixed old and young growth forests before I hit the turnoff into an old highway leading to the dirt roadways that was still in use. The dirt roadway was set up cutting over the old cement of the highway. Wooden ramps allowed for vehicles to get up onto a single 2-way slab of cement that was still maintained through the pathway of the dirt road. Funny and interesting looking, I was excited to get back to it. If anything, the trip had been worth it for the crown jewel of all the prizes I had collected. By the water, I had found the back end of a wall of an RV, floating with its cabinets face up along the shore edge. I fished it out in order to see the bottom end had metal plating. I could peel it off, and I did it. When I checked the cabinets, I found nothing but 6 well-preserved porno DVDs with 5 of the 6 front covers with the pictures of the girls still intact. The laminated paper only slightly beginning to warp around the edges from being inside the cabinet out in water. Tucked away under the fading plastic, the DVDs all there, The pictures alone would be worth a fortune in trading value at any general place I took them into. Pictures like these could ruin someone's life back when they were first taken. People these days no longer had the time to ruin their lives. So similarly to any other escape, these were now luxury goods, like a hit of opium that never ran out for any man around. These thoughts passed me by, sometimes stopping to adjust. I looked at the women on the front covers and was reminded again and again of what I saw on the beach. I took them out to check the DVDs. If they worked, I could wait weeks to plan my next move. The CDs looked clean, but I was unsure whether these things, like laser discs, degraded easily, especially in damp and humid conditions. They were protected well in their cases, so I held high hopes. If they played without any issue, I might even find someone willing to let me use their computer to burn them into flash drives and sell copies digitally. Beginning my life as a traveling salesman, bringing copies of my scavenged porn from town to town, I somehow needed to acquire an old USB stick to copy the files onto and then create my own business. No, these thoughts were stupid. Porn still existed on almost every working hard drive, and especially people still own those. I would just sell the DVD copies. I continued walking, trying to plan my next decision. I hoped to make enough money to nurse myself back to health over a week. Food I bought was inexpensive and effective at keeping me going, but that was about it. I couldn't sleep in town and would instead walk out to the campsites around it and set fire to cook. Buying weird nutritional tea bags of flavoring for all vitamin needs for either my water or cooked grain to be set. I noticed a few forest creatures as I walked, mostly birds. The forest had an abundance of deer who always creeped me out. At this point, the woods contained an even ratio to humans to deer for this region. Their eyes never were fully there, neither were their bodies. They were like creatures of the realm who breached the world, bringing the necklace into the glass, and who cursed people out to act out in ways that created the scene on the beach. The eyes further on the sides of their head left them appearing split between two worlds, two sides. Looking up at me, straining their eyes as I walked by, trying to focus, they faced forwards to meet mine. Their eyes were strained to bring them together at the front of their face to make eye contact. They looked as if they desperately wanted to move when I first noticed them, grazing on the sides of the roadway. Only once my flank matched theirs, when they were side to side, whenever at this point happened, did they finally relax. When my side was as open as theirs, and my right or left eye could meet theirs predominantly on the sides of their heads, did they know that instinctively that at that point I was not acting as a predator. A social interaction between animals that determined predation or simple acknowledgement. The deer could tell when my two eyes situated close together on the front of my face, trained on them, establishing a depth of field, an ability that could inform me how close I was to touching them, that I was situated as a pursuer while they were prey. They would try to meet my face as the same, but biology was hard to cheat. Only once my head was turned so one eye could meet theirs did they instinctively or otherwise understand that there would be no chase. They would find the comfortable control where they knew that biologically that they held the higher ground. They could comfortably watch me with their one eye, and I would have to now turn in order to chase, where they could sprint off in the direction they faced. The only problem is that deer didn't otherwise understand is that human beings are obnoxiously persistent animals. They could pursue until the deer was too exhausted to even move, and when the deer finally collapsed, they could even use their bare hands to cease their gasping breath. It was unfair and impersonal, with no teeth needed. No struggle had, just exhaustion in the final move in. Every access point open for a distantly cold killing, completely unsensual. I felt guilty. Their bodies were frozen stiff as I walked by. At some levels, I always hated them for the way they made me feel. They had built a tension that would only be relieved for themselves once I went away. They had initiated a reaction in me that forced my attention and my instinctual pursuit to consume them, but my heart and body were split in two. I didn't want to pursue, but I was hungry, and my eyes made that clear. So I left the only with attention, an irritation, a grudge for all of them. This is how they spoke to the other side. Their split eyesight peering in and pushing out intentions in people that were never meant for each other, but rather for animals of prey. For every prey animal, constantly initiating a predatory reaction, at least at some level, a deep drive within each person, a tension to predate never relieved. There was a reaction between people that never meant for each other. Only after a certain amount of this tension would the slide open up. When a foolish person wrongly display enough prey animal flashes to bring out everything hidden within with a scene like the one found on the beach flip in and come out. The mirror world was peacefully hidden and would relieve itself for everyone in the area. A catharsis of carnage for an otherwise for all animals, even if the trees would turn red with green to purple leaves. I was exhausted, so I took a break. I was good about only drinking enough to keep me just above minute dehydration. A water bottle in hand, sipping as I needed, I found a nice spot by a pond and sat down. Trees were abundant, so I was never not in shade. This was extraordinary for walking. The trees leaked sap everywhere, so I had to be careful about where I sat. Otherwise, I was really thankful for them. I would have died from heat stroke long ago, that or dehydration, if it hadn't been for the shade they provided. So I found a spot underneath a shrub so large one could call it a tree, and took things easy for a while. I continued thinking about the mutilated dead body I had seen. I wondered why someone would want those specific parts. As people's lives and the functionality with the overall quality of life got worse and worse, weird forms of spirituality became more and more popular. The old religions has used up most of the world, so what remained of them was mostly infused with what may have been considered witchy practices. I held the belief that most really old primeval, pre-Moses religions, or spirituality, similar in their worship of their one God and the prophets, and the holy figures that brought the God, that was really stupid though. I didn't know enough about any ancient religion, Abrahamic or not, to pass those forms of judgment. No one knew anymore. Bibles were abundant, but no one understood them, either because they could not read or because the English was too old. Most spiritual practices now carried out through rituals, prayers, or spells. Holy or evil, cursed items mostly by weird shop-owning people or what some may call artists. They were the new, half-assed holy folks of the settlements that were around. The only places you would find actual churches anymore were in the large industrial zones. There were the contamination more in line with what was built on top of the old population centers of this region, the big cities. A few of them. Not much information goes around anymore. People stay put. It was a mystery. What the rest of the adjacent continuation of the landmass was like, there was a massive old industrial zone with some neighboring smaller but still large communities containing a smaller but still present population. Remember that a lot of the sprawl was mostly gone. The houses were still there, but they were far along in their transition back to nature. Some managed to be maintained, mostly communities that had somehow stayed together even up until now. Otherwise, people followed the work. I heard rumors about the conditions where the population density was at its height. I had a feeling that this lake I scavenged at was largely due to this runoff, one of these population centers situated by a largemouth river. The churches must have been really old buildings that, due to some unseen force, made it this long. Most shrines and temples in the smaller towns I have been to, I know 3, were a weird throw together of various religious symbols, found and made objects. They would always have at least a single Bible and depictions of Jesus, but satanic and pagan imagery was also abundant. Candles and pentagrams, sculptures made of various found materials hung about. One such shrine was made from an old gazebo at an old park center. It was a miracle of architectural design and structural prowess that this thing was still standing. The roof was always being retarred, which kept the water off, and I guess that's all it took to keep the outdoor structure from decaying. The roof was held up by rectangular metal beams and wooden fencing, keeping the structure a closed-in structure. The whole thing was surrounded by tasteful metal fencing and gate, an old mechanism from when the park used to close. Some of the wood on the sculpture had been lost to time, but the decay matched the mismatched shrine, the various symbols and imagery. That was the last place I visited before setting out. It was on my way in, so I stopped there to focus myself on whatever fate I set out to discover. The shrine didn't disappoint, but it made it clear that was the price to be paid for good fortune and working with the powers that be. That's at least what I told myself. I felt like a hypocrite because I patronized people who had faith, but then turned around and during desperate times did the same. I tried to rationalize. I had the thought that somewhere in the back of my mind where I stored my faith, that this reason things had worked out is because I allowed instincts to guide me towards success. My gut feeling, my initial reaction, they were the faith, a faith in myself. I remember the satanic imagery from the shrine and felt a sickness fall over me. These were pond water thoughts. I was upset that I was succumbing to them. My eyes were open, staring at a bush above me as I laid there. My eyes hurt and I had no idea why. The top of my penis was also really uncomfortable. I felt entirely cursed and had no obvious way out. I thought back to the necklace in the glass I broke and knew. Something wanted me to submit. Like I had said about the deer. It was a built tension I was rather than executing. I'd been entirely consumed. I had to keep moving, try and keep it off. My soul was drowning in the sickening pond water. I sprang up to my feet and whipped around. The mind then finally found the gateway up the hill, up the skirt. Standing on my right side was an elk frozen in place. The things were out for my fucking blood. All carrions had it out for me. Unlike the few domesticated animals I knew, the wild ones, just like humans, had an ability to facially express terror. The elk's entire being was frozen. The sickness poked my butt and my entire person closed up in trauma. Like feelings felt from the woman's found corpse, finally caught up to me and tried to rape me through the elk. One of those demons carried from the other side, wanted in and had used the elk as a vessel, hiding away in one of its eyes. I was trying to find its way into me. My instincts were sharp enough to fend it off, my body, but my mind was weak and had gotten through the open hole in my eyeball, pulling out something I had ready yet to grapple with. It forced me to acknowledge emotions and thoughts I wanted to deal with in my own time. The fear drained from its face as it entered mine, and it excitedly skipped away as I was left there petrified in fear, entombed in my own trauma now fully recognized. I knew a nearly full water bottle I was working with, nursing, and casted it. I was trying to get away with griefful rape in and pulling out something I had no right to remove. I dashed forwards, cut loose from my mind, seeing the bottle connecting with the back leg, knocking it in and sending the elk crashing down. I predated forwards as it sprawled and thrashed, trying to recollect itself and get back on its legs. I came down with my foot on its side, its ribcage. My shoes were flimsy but still landed in, punching heavy. Gut flooded my body, and I took a moment to pause before removing the knife from my coat and stabbing the elk in the neck. Movement uncertain while the elk tried to recover air. Even with ribs broken in, punctured lungs in a foot-sole pattern, even with my timidness, the violence was too quick and the elk died, drowning in its blood. I had never killed an elk before. Skinning it was difficult and my work was in patches. I started a fire, sawing off chunks to put them upon rocks around the flame. I would turn them as needed to keep them even roast. It was still midday and I was exhausted. I multitasked, keeping the flies away with a large stick while cooking. I continuously ate the rest of the day and into the night. I convinced myself on my ability to be a friend using elk meat, so one passed by. If hostile during daylight, I can run out into the woods. But at night, it was a beacon by the campfire. Vulnerable, illuminated to anything hidden in the dark, I needed to stay sharp, allowing my staring abilities if a bear approached. I gave up on the corpse now, mangled from the removal of flesh. I used my last bit of water to put out the fire. I could boil more when I woke up. I found my spot back under the brush and fell away, far into dreamland. I woke up with the flame relit. I was far enough away, situated under the brush. I was in a good position to watch the event unfold, or many entirely unnoticed. The skinned, half-consumed corpse was speaking in tongues like it knew the language written in the dissolving cast iron amulet, and it was speaking in reverse. The voice was low and harsh, layered almost like something speaking while inhaling, mixed with a baritone singing voice. It was chanting, and with each sentence the fire would blaze up. The fire itself was unnaturally larger, much too large for the fire pit and embers that contained it. Its back was turned to me. I could only see tendons exposed where I had carved. I had purposely cut around the tendons because they were harder to saw, and I wanted to eat the most nutritious parts, the parts of blood. Loose chunks of fat I had failed to cut out remained loosely attached to the reanimated corpse as it ritualized the campfire. I turned around mid-sentence, shoulders tense, spine curved, staring out into the darkness. I didn't see me, but the stare indicated that it was sensing me, somewhere. His eyes glazed over for a couple times. They were lidless and bulging, bug-eyed. I'd eaten parts of his face and it was completely skinless. Its jaw hung open. It looked like it was in immense pain. It looked like it was being driven by the pain. It looked like it was using the pain as a fuel for the fire. It abruptly stopped talking, looking around, raised its head and let out a laugh, and stepped into the fire. It burst into flames and started screaming, growing back into a living elk. Blood-curdling screams around more terrifying, coming from an inhuman animal burning alive than from a person. I closed my eyes and laid back down, listening as I went to sleep. The fire was out and the elk was gone the next morning. Something dragged the corpse away while I was asleep. That must have conjured what disturbed me during the night. Trauma finally caught up to me. I rejected my fear. It made logical sense for me to wake up during its removal, but I found it strange that my brain was so strongly able to warp reality. That also explains why the night terror involved the dead elk. I felt bad. Unfortunately, I was being harassed by the animal prior to its demise. At least that's how I felt. Maybe it just wanted to be my friend. I boiled water and set off walking. I turned at the first crossroads and continued until I rediscovered the bridge leading through the road. It wasn't a bridge. It needed to lift over something to technically function as a bridge. Although it was similar enough to be a bridge, we called it a bridge. So that's why I continued to call it a bridge. I approached the lifted crossroad as an old truck bellowed through. It didn't slow down before hitting the ramp and it practically jumped the pavement. I was happy to see other people again. I stepped off the ground onto cover and went around the crossroads. I continued along the side of the dirt road in case another vehicle drove by. I walked and made it back into town. Chapter 2. Civilization Thrusted and Born. "The world is small," was the first thing I heard from the man leaning against the wall. The building was just a piece of concrete. Only the wall parallel to the street remained. On it was the name of the place, named after the strong oak tree found growing along the creek in the neighboring woodlands. There was a map of the general oakwood layout of the town below the town name. I didn't need to stop to memorize the layout. The man knew that in spit. The place was tired and dead, built on the new ground of an old park. Before people established residence, the only structure was the gazebo. The whole town stemmed from this little shrine. I'm not sure how it became a holy site. Something about it acted as a metaphysical barrier. Nothing out of the ordinary ever happened here. All the special was eaten from you, assumedly after you walked up the steps and basked in the effigies and lit a bunch of candles. That's why the community's edges were round and dull. The shrine explained everything once, depicting humanoid people. You finally entered, and it contained a warm, damp feeling. I left an elk too, as a good measure. Around the outside of the structure, the frame falling apart, I found several worship sculptures depicting humanoid people. The first one I imagined as something which could be birthed from beneath the surface of the deserts beyond the mountains, had the quality of unnatural discipline, created a petrifying atmosphere. The face was constructed in a way meaning an apocalyptic fate only described as hell. From its mouth escaped a centipede serpent with small clay legs jutting and held together from a form of resin. These legs in multiple segments were also put together using wire in between clay. The mouth that gaped was birthing the snake with legs from its gullet. Submitted the art installation found a home harbored by a trapped body, acting not only as a demon but a figure possessed by a demon too. I figured this based on the captured, stunned, and lifeless expression on its face. The expression seems to be from a combination of their pain and the refocusing from the demon caught within. Like the puppet was a silent observer of its own fate, with the demon within containing them and upon another vision. Hung for positions between segments, he must have been partially a puppet. Neither supposed for this world or any other, the agony granted by the escaping centipede provided a moment trapped in time captured by the clay body. I moved on. The next sculpture was more vicious. I made up a story about what the pieces represented. Obviously, they were segmented body parts connected through vaginal penetration of sex and oral dispersion of body. The sculpture was to me a man with a tilt towards God, fucking a demon out of a woman's body. Through vaginal intake, the demon was forced out through the woman's mouth. Set up like a circus act, they were caught in a moment of ecstasy. I refused the situation to be painful. Dilapidated into positions hosted by ropes, they were held together with wire art twisted amongst them hold fast to the system, using the death of another to create the art. Their predetermined hell of creation exploited to string up the bodies. beautiful in their perfect positioning. I coo to the sky how much love can be constructed by the shamanistic field of expression. The third piece of art I believe true to be assembled by a stitching together of faces, of masks caught in expression as desolate faces removed by their prior expressors. Bada's holy harmony, their creator, was a constant of inner peace, while justifiably creating each expression laid out upon small masks, stitched together by wire and wound up into a dragon. I spied a conglomerate of humanity and personality. I loved each as they loved me. Upon the dragon's faces was a rider with backs stitched apart into twined fairy wings. Segmented clay pieces put together with wire to create body. Sunken face expressing nothing. I couldn't project any emotion upon them. Haunting, it hung there, some ways more hidden than the rest. The fourth piece I wallowed in. It depicted torture. The ornate wire art connected the flying pig demon to the poor man who kept hovering to their togetherness. Horror gripped his face as it forced to confront the empty sockets of the pig. Dick fully erect, it was an erection of power, not sexuality. They were to be used to be fur to cause suffering rather than self-pleasure. A convenience to the demon itself is already suffocated by its suffocating nature. Caught in a time of sculpture, like all things, eventually the wire would rust away in the rain, and the pieces of the man tormented and infused eternally with the flying demon, I believe he might somehow find rest. I wanted to deconstruct and destroy this one due to the intimate object's protruding energy of suffering. The final piece was a clownfish, sewn together similar to the flying dragon whose wings were so beautifully wet carved out. This fish held an imprint mask that expressed so much emotion you might expect them to truly be in exaggerated ecstasy, creasing into agony. I disliked this one because it was less creative. This one traumatized itself in its stiffness in its creation. To fully wrap my point in the spiritual sense caused pain due to the expressed nature, unlike the rest. The other pieces were creative art, art which could only inspire others to create themselves. Creative art pushed action. After my first stop, the same man I had seen outside the town walked through repeating, "Would you fetch my glass, dear?" and took a seat in his hutch, possibly handcrafted to perfection, with no exit or breakaway. He had no door to close. I wandered towards my next destination. I opened the door to the Oakwood business, what could be considered the general store. Approaching the counter, the man asked what I wanted. I told him about my adventure before getting down to business. He explained the value of feet and hands. He explained how small bones and things could easily be made into worthwhile charms, granting various blessings or curses in disguise, being extremely powerful, originally belonging to someone's body. In fact, the fresher the bones, the more potent the charm. I was skeptical. The fetus was even more valuable. You can pickle those little suckers, they'll shrivel up and dry out. Keep them around and you'll live younger. I had enough. No explanation was given for the bottle. He explained that I was probably cursed. I exorcised the demon when I killed the elk. No, that demon left you with that curse after it left your body, and left this world through your cooking fire. He continued explaining something about how killing the elk didn't count. The demon was in me by then. That explained why I was able to kill the thing with such accuracy. Complete sense. Apparently I was given part of that demon when the elk looked at me. It noticed me after all. By focusing on the face, I collected that part of it. From the right corner of my hairline down my right eye, the initial cut I had made from its chin along the right side of its jawline, down its right shoulder all the way to its hoof to begin the skinning process. All those places were now demonic. The far right of my face and neck, including the eye and my right arm, were demonic. He was wary of my right hand. He kept glancing at it. I didn't believe his words. I was just going crazy due to the variety of issues. I was lacking some key nutrients, and my mind was rebelling. I needed to leave and go get some of those herb mixtures, teas and seasonings to fix micronutrients malnourishment. I pulled out all the useful things I had collected, everything you might find sold in a general store, all the knickknacks too. The man was resourceful. He used the forge to recycle scrap metal. I handed him in all the scrap metal and made about, and he expected. I left to buy food. He wished me luck, shaking his head. I found the food outlet where I had left it. I didn't hate the person who owned and sold off the property, but given different circumstances, I easily could. I bought 2 apples and some seasonings for my grain. That's all I needed for the time being, and set out to where I stored my belongings. I left them with someone I knew well enough to trust, an old coworker. I had worked with her on building structures and doing forestry work. We would cut down the abundance of trees around town and bring wood back. We would build sawmills to create boards for structures, and all the tree scraps too small to be turned into boarding. These were everywhere and walked through old neighborhoods and towns were becoming more and more difficult because of the plants. Houses with roofs caved in now grew tree-like giant terrariums. It was beautiful in a way, the decay of structures back into nature. I hated cutting down the trees. There just wasn't enough people for it to matter anymore. We worked and the town grew. We helped improve and fix the structures the residents worked and lived in. It was good work. We helped improve lives while avoiding extreme exploitation. The beauty of the woods was important and provided safety, keeping the town relatively private with only one road in or out. We were selective of the trees we cut down, only timbering trees specifically out of space. That was bullshit. Nature performs that process perfectly, and our help speeding it up was extremely unnecessary. That must be why Timber Mill burned down. Nature hated us on impeding on its process. Human beings were never meant to have access to the most critical of all resources, trees. At least for development, without wood, where would we be as a species? No wheel, no fire, nowhere, nothing. As a species, we were never meant to leave the jungle. Trees used to be our homes, our friends. Up in the canopies where we were safe. Then we grew legs and started walking, a completely childish thing to do. That's how we were now building structures and exploiting nature to the fullest extent of our minds. We were in constant arms race and had no escape. Our primal nature has been extinguished. God had raped us as a species and continued to hold its dick in us, puppying us about against the ancient forces that once governed this world. They still do, and we were slowly reclaiming our species too. I stopped thinking, getting upset by the young lady I was staring at. She was such an exploitative cunt, and I was all I had, somehow. She had poked another fucking hole in my prized possession tent. I was calmly losing my mind, staring as she stood vapid. I thanked her for looking after my stuff. The people who had governed this place had forced me out. They blamed me for the mill as it burnt down. I was the half that built the fucking thing. It wasn't our fault that the structure caught fire. Being made of thrashed parts, the engine possibly lit the fire, burning the whole thing down. She was my only and my friend, so I had to be nice. I didn't want to sleep with her. I had enough fucking to last the next few days. I needed to repay the debt. I offered my next excursion for her to join me on. She politely denied. Now it was my time to set up the tent. Another missed opportunity. At least this time it wasn't my fault. She offered to start over. Something different as I instead ditched town. Always set my plan to forage trash. Women and their propensity to pin people down. Disgusting. I always listen to certain dominant feminine types speak in the same light. Human beings are fucking resources. That's why I steered clear. What a stupid thing to believe. As my mind caught up on lost socializing time, engaging with itself, I got my tent pitched by myself. I was too hyped up. I didn't want to go to bed. I should have fucked her. That could calm me down. Now quietly I laid in my open sleeping bag. I'd swear the sweat was like acid, if I had caked the walls over the years. I ejaculated all over my hand and would regret the morning hurt when I would go back to see her. Plus my dick would be inflamed and rashy. You cannot cheat the devil, even if it seemed easier. I didn't dream. I was sick and hated myself. Something in the back of my mind was telling me what to do. I was listening and following the instructions. This time I had no strings attached. The curse was in my mind. I had contracted it through that beast. No, the bottle, the necklace. I had something out, tempted by its evil power. The black juice, licked up by the elk floating downstream. It was repetitive, cyclical. I busted open the cabin door, primed for intercourse. My penis was long and powerful. The tendon was offset half an inch on my pelvis, keeping the thing corkscrewed up and to the left. She preferred it that way. This was normal. I ejaculated into her mouth and she spit at me. We calmed down. That was too personal, I winced out. For some reason I felt much better. Her eyes rolled back and the lids hovered slightly open. What a waste of time. I should be more careful. We didn't want to waste away our lives. We could use that energy for something more reproductive. The fear of reproduction wasn't on our minds. I knew my limit. The man in the street was slashing his wrists. He may have been high. He had warned people after all. I reawoke from my nightmare, or was it a dream? It was some gray area. More painful than a dream, obnoxiously empowering. That felt alright, but it couldn't be a dream. In dreams you float. I was dehydrated and still felt sick. A desperate fly in my tent was begging for my attention. If only my hands were spiders. I could weave a web and catch the fly, putting me out of my misery. I found my pants at the bottom of my sleeping bag and slipped them on. It was time to pack up and leave. The spot I had set up in my tent no longer wanted me. I was too much for its presence, a liability. The fly knew it. My tent supported me. My sleeping bag kept me safe. I stuffed my stuff back into their bags and took down the tent. The tent was set up from nothing over my head. An actual structure would be nice. I situated my bags over myself and walked towards town. I was in trouble. She was angry. I slept in the tent at the edge of town instead of staying with her. I explained that I needed to ease back into socializing. I recalled the same story that I had told the shopkeep, how they had butchered her. I was honest, explained that being haunted was making me squeamish. She didn't care enough to try and understand. The information caught a breeze over her head. The only response I received was mild irritation. She was something I had been dealing with my entire life. I called it dick blindness, coining the term. I wouldn't apologize until later. I needed some time just to be around someone. Like I said, she was all I had. She was much better situated. She was a young woman. And even these days, people would come to her aid one way or another. Only at downtimes, of course. When the mill burned down, she was offered work on a nearby farm. The oldster felt bad. I took the fall for the entire situation while she fled to the farm. The old man even let her live with him. Who knows, maybe she was just some poor girl who fled to go live with some 50-year-old man. Out of pure desperation was taken advantage of. I wouldn't know. I didn't ask. She didn't seem to resent me as much as I did her, so she was probably carrying some burden, because of my actions or otherwise. I noticed and decided to drop my attitude. Needed to be pinned down some. It would keep me from becoming completely unwound. The situation was psychotic either way. I was being swallowed by my mind and needed an escape. I chose my only option. It wasn't the most awful situation. She made me food. We ate. Apparently I wasn't allowed to leave again. I agreed. The relationship was old and drawn out. It was already dead in the water. Based on circumstance, personal as well as societal downturn. We had to do what was necessary to get by for one another, leaving me feeling constantly awful. I just wanted to be free, but the mutual emotional neglect was compounding. I gave in and rolled over. We agreed to stay with her and figure something out. I could work on the farm with her. She pulled the strings with the old fellows. They would give me instructions I would follow. It became like clockwork. I worked only a month before finding it out. I hated being in one spot. Especially wasn't my space. Secretly, I believed the old guy really despised me. He wanted me under his wing, but I wasn't ready to settle down yet. I still had some life in me. There were other things I wanted to do before settling into the day-to-day. I just had to wait. Opportunity would eventually find me. I was in town one afternoon when travelers stopped through. Amazing that the town never enveloped itself. Nearly staying afloat, self-sustained. First travelers in weeks, and they planned to stay a while. I met them at a bar, not actually a bar, but the only place in town you could buy any cooked food. I was sitting at a bar on a stool, elbows on the raised counter, hands in the air limp with curled fingers, palms facing up. My back was no longer crooked, doing farm work, so it was curled like a normal spine. They approached the counter casually. I turned my head to stare as they ordered. The alcohol distilled with locally grown grains, as they were the only options with fruits. Honey too. I was repeating my blue feelings after all I had been pinned down. They must have felt my feelings, engaging me. Something about my unconscious behavior acted as the real initiator, but they were the first to speak. They ordered waters and liquor, while I was drinking, and took their seats. 7 in total, they explained. Only 3 at the bar with me. Their faux leaders sitting next to me with 1 and 2 alongside. Conversation came naturally as we drank. It was midday, but the dark atmosphere kept the place in night. A smart move, as I could waste the entire day away. Pretending I had nothing left to do. Nowhere else to go in the complete absence of sunlight. That's how the conversation carried. Like the day was over and our social societal guard could be dropped if there was any. There was very alive, unused to the environments, and I was open. They fell into the openness of my web as the only socially available townsfolk they could find. I told them some general stories so they could understand my personality from my background, and they told me some of theirs. It was casual enough that at nightfall, I ordered to show them town, introduce them to anybody they desired to meet, make them feel as welcome part of time members of the community. It was dusk. Through the grapevine of everyone, I saw that they became incorporated into our little cesspool. They appreciated me for that. We said our farewells. They found the open shacks, collectively owned by the town. They would have to pay a fee for sleeping in them, and they settled down. I wandered back to the farm, found my lady, and settled in, drifting to sleep. Another week would pass, another work week, another partial work week, 2 days. The farm really only needed one other hand, and actually someone could run the whole thing on their own. The farmer did for over 10 years. He had a wife who died a few years after their final child of 2 abandoned home. Only now that his body was reaching its final stretch into decay did he have to bring on a youngster. Now he had two. One to fill in the missing daughter and another for his son. Only difference is that these two would occasionally sleep together and sleep with each other every night. He could tell when they would attempt to gyrate in secrecy, but no matter how discreet, he always sensed conjoined bodies in the air. The roles were all there. The young man was too disrespectful for it to be any different. The farmer preferred it. He would be the respectful one, not the other way around. What a strange turn of events! I had my woman with me and they had theirs. Not disrespectfully, the system would no longer function. No longer we silently acknowledge property, and the woman acknowledged the dogs, controlled by their subhuman function of guarding unspoken silence, based on differences of size or testosterone rather, between sexes or genders. Also rape. They needed us to prevent it. We needed them so they wouldn't project it. Without her, I would never have been trusted by another group. It would be a great risk to assume me as another actual human person. I was once again distracted, staring at the ground. This time the women talked. No need to let the dogs communicate. Progress would be too slow. I virtue signaled in good faith. The other men didn't care. That was always my problem. These men had the silent belief of superiority. They were completely tamed. I was in their backyard feeling doing as I pleased. They were chained to the neighboring doghouse. The men drank without notice, but the woman took disrespect. I needed to be on my best behavior. No holes to be dug in the bushes. I was to be out and pacing, walking presentably. My mind wandered as I remained docile. I continued in my belief that I shouldn't be trusted in my brief, genuine but overdone smiles. Unfortunately, these women weren't judging my dishonest behavior, but rather my successful coercion by the other women into functioning correctly, the ones who cared about my actual behavior. They would need me to completely act naturally, work in tandem how I need to be a part of the pack, through building camaraderie, pursuing, raping women and children, or hunting deer, building or destroying. I would be part of the pack and needed to show it. Sickening thoughts with sickening behavior. I hate having to put on a show for strangers. That's why I worked alone. I was exhausted by her looks and by the approval she received from the other women. The guys didn't care. I was preferentially and reasonably omega, along for the ride so long as I didn't care. I continued to play along. I always preferred groups of only men or women. That way it could settle one acceptable behavior. It was easier. Completely schizoidal and going entirely unnoticed, may be appreciated for my adaptability, being useful during any situation involving new people. I ended up asking if we could join them. They were heading to the city on a quest to assist the transfer of important people, not in the bodies, but rather their belongings. We would shadow them as they approached the coast, finding the water to board some special boat. We had good chemistry. The pieces fell into place, creating a nice conjoined group. These people not at all long-time partners or friends. We wouldn't be bursting any bubble, only adding air. She seemed upset when I asked without discussing with her. She appreciated the timing. At that point, I loosened up. 1 or 2 drinks in, craftily pacing myself, while all besides 2 were down 8. 2 more to be under. No one would care. Just 2 more people along for the ride. In some ways, it was impossible not to know. The farmer knew it. Time to hire new hands. Just young one man, no older than 14. We were sent to fetch him at about time for him to start working. Excitedly, he followed to the farm, the only fresh meat in town. Like an exchange of bodies, sent on our way exchanging of his. We would leave the town in a couple of days. The place functioned in strange ways. No real property ownership. We gave our belongings over to town in a verbal exchange for a place to live again if we ever had returned. If we happened to make it back, we'd be given similar items as we turned in. They even wrote what we gave them on lists. It was carved in stone, only taking what was necessary along with valuable belongings with self-imposed values, like jewelry, books, anything that over the years had become part of us. I kept those belongings to a minimum. I remember the necklace in the glass. That would have been my soul, alas. I carried some of her belongings. She had at least half a bag full of various collected goodies. Like a crow, she was always attracted to flashy objects, as was I. Maybe it was a sign of intelligence. A misplaced mind was easy to align with a little flash, like a quick death, rebirthing. My mind was created with potential fantasies of the journey. It was always sickening. They killed me every time I broke from reality, finishing them completely in my head, setting me down on the wrong path. A superiorly interesting way to live a life, but constantly unsatisfactory, like a story that never finished, a soul adrift, never at peace. What a complete lie. Everything was a lie. I lied to live, as did everybody. It was that or be a part of other people, a part of something. Unfortunately, I found that nasty. I was open to her ideas as we prepared to leave. I wanted nothing besides food and water with me. I would carry something to use for sleep. She carried other stuff. I didn't pay attention. I had no idea. Otherwise, we were ready to leave. We finally escaped. We stopped one more time in town to purchase food before meeting up. They explained the way to go, something I'd drawn on the map and written general directions, like a treasure map, an X marking the spot. That's where we would end up. Never before have I been in a group with so many travelers. They asked us if we were ready, and I slightly declined. A good laugh between us all, and a gradual decline into seriousness. I confess that I never before had traveled in a large group. They brought out a gun and handed it to me, some old pistol. It was useless with pistols, but it was reassuring. The side had a tally. Someone had replaced the once plastic grip with wood. It was terrifying and disgustingly empowering. I had a little care either way. I would never need to use it until I finally would lose it. One final check and then a double check of everything, and we were off. I had 3 pairs of clothing, one for 2 days in a row. It would only be 7 days of walking, including today, so it didn't matter. I would be someplace fancy where I could wash them. We could only be 2 days by vehicle. We would move incredibly slowly as a caravan. Apparently they would move at less than 20 so they couldn't fall. The first day of walking was easy. No issues, just sleep stepping. The environment was oddly professional. I felt cursed again, just like every other day of my life. I wanted another adventure. This supposed to be my story, and again I was silent as a part of the group. Everyone finally behaved better now that we were away from the booze, but the life was dead. Now all that remained was sickening small talk and depression as I walked. My face was disgruntled by the sun. I took the rays and reflected them into the ground with my shiny face. I was sweaty. I could easily use the light to understand the professional attitude. Unfortunately, the constant liquid on my face continued to bend the light back. The light was a pain anyways. You were at odds with the darkness. The absolute worst things you can make enemy with. Humans rely on sight, so if you enter the light and prey on the dark, you better be a damn good listener. You might never know when something will reach you out and pull you under. Often during the most inopportune time. You will live through it or die trying. No matter what, something will always be taken away. Finally, some genuine belief. The professionalism and phony smiles dragged it out. My mind acted as my counter to all their incorrect actions they forced upon me. I needed my freedom, and that was something they could never take away. When they inevitably did, I ended their reign, torn away their world. They found a way in, through my ear. I pulled in all the water and drowned them. I'm talking about my parents. That's how I escaped their trauma. They were hoarders in an ocean of trash. They threw nothing away. Somehow they managed to stay together, mostly because they took all their problems out on me. There was immeasurable violence. So much of my pain and suffering was there. I had butterfly skin by the end of it. None of that mattered. I was out of it. I would never stop haunting her, not myself, someone next to me while I was walking. She told me her story and I listened. I was inevitably nightfall by then. They had miscalculated, claiming to have misspoken. Either way, we were behind on distance and needed to make up the space using time. She reminded me of a baleen whale. I like baleen whales. They always seem so nice. I could relate to big things that consume the minute, avoiding responsibility, taking the day to day, nearly asleep. These were tired thoughts. It was time to rest. Me and this other woman that had finally caught up with the rest of the group. It had been nearly an hour since anyone talked, and they finally found a spot to sleep out in the open. A large suspicious patch of dirt, really dirty and dusty. I slept in my clothes and used my arm as a pillow till falling asleep. I hate sleeping around people. I wasn't alone. I'd been conditioned to sleep around someone else, so the change was a gradual decline away from solitude. My dreams were disconnected, like I was peering into something else from the outside. They had made me question whether my life choices were intelligent. I preferred nightmares over this bore, not entirely but mostly. I observed people move through life with a watchful eye, an outside perspective, only briefly. I guess my mind was trying to reassure itself that they were fine. I would think about buying a blank notebook in the morning, write my dreams away, keeping the journal up to date at how my mind was behaving, watch it metamorphose, a little experiments in change in myself. The next day we felt better. I was a natural nomadic traveler. Most people generally were, moving around and looking for new things to keep the mind preoccupied, busy and maintained. Otherwise, nothing special happened. We ate at a cooking station using kerosene to light the fire. I was impressed with the sophistication of the setup. I was much quicker and easier than making a campfire. Super discreet. We ate oatmeal with dried milk, berries picked from the day earlier, and artificial sweetener. It was good. It packed light. This is what we would eat for breakfast the next 5 days. Better than what I was used to. They had a homemade water purification pump, but it worked about as fast as boiling method. We cut the time in half doing both simultaneously, filling up our bottles and sacks. They had water purification tablets as well, but we would save those. After this and dusting ourselves off, we were set. We were moving towards the city instead of turning off the dirt road at the old road crossroad. We continued straight over the pavement back onto the dirt. That was yesterday and this is today. I was surprised when arguments bursted out between members of our group. Nothing major, I guess. We broke the ice. Ice kept me cool, rigid, calm. These were all the things keeping me safe. I was no longer alone. It was inevitable. The real problem was that the strategy kept me progressing through life. It was my rock. Somehow I understood my behavior was creating tension, but it wasn't my fault. These fools had no ways to exercise besides bickering. Complete metaphor. That's how I communicated with people who I couldn't trust. They were wanting my life information. For me to drop the cool, calm, and collected cold, I wasn't willing to sell myself. Not yet. I reiterate, I only use metaphor, speaking of myself using no solid facts. This bothered them at some level. Refusing to be direct, they fought it out. Simulating issues between others, creating issues in my own life, setting me down the wrong path. Every time it would backfire. Life. A complex yet simple life. Constantly in solitude. Leaving me set the wrong place for the right moment. Not anymore. She had pinned me down. She forced me to work a stable life. A day-to-day along her side for nearly a month. This meant I was a month down on the incorrect path. Sickening. It would take at least a month to step off. While I worked this awful job, stressing these people, it wasn't meant to be here. I was the mistress who got messed up, and only once out, I would catch up and knock me down. Stacking a debt just by being around these people. And inadvertently screwing me by being emotionally immature and childish. I hated them. For this reason, I was standoffish. An arms race neither would win. I didn't start it, but I would certainly be around to see it end. Or not. I might have to suffer completely alone. Again. The third time. She noticed believing I was under stress. Not by behavior, not now. Human behavior was never not fascinating. Sounded stupid, but this is how it started. With a bunch of lost strangers and a dumb girl. I just had to keep my senses and realize what would get me later in life. A few weeks, a year, it depends. Just stay out of it. Don't look. Listen without judgment. Never land. Pass right by me. Crazy people, crazy thoughts being driven by crazy people, right? I wouldn't know. I was outside adrift. A balloon warped around my neck with a long string. Somewhere up above my head, letting out, sleeping in the air. We were far away from town, completely surrounded by woods. Finally, we discovered an old town. First, a suburban neighborhood, completely consumed by woodlands, ghosts, and old houses. Shadows of walls to walk through trees. An old window peered at me, peeking around trunks of evergreen trees. We were on high ground. An upper hill, a plateau of arid woods. Trees with lower dead branches jutting out of trunks at perpendicular angles, resembling large spikes. The windows blackened by years of decay, and around the panes. We watched and paced, never cutting through the old pavement that constituted the streets, only noticing peaks and parts of old houses. The dirt roads eventually met up with the streets of an old town. The pavement and business of this downtown region were split open in growing hairs of shrubbery and trees. This was more recent. The concrete spot was harder for nature to retake. The old apartment buildings were standing along with the combined business living space apartment buildings lining the streets of the downtown region. This was a sight to behold. On the edge of town was a stationary construction equipment specifically for paving roads. These were guarded with fences and contained what may have been an old gas station, now converted into a building containing National Guard. They were corrupt and terrifying. The construction workers who were brought to repair the roads biannually were gone. A single road going through the downtown area connected at both ends by dirt roads, leading back through more wilderness. This was the only paved road in the entire region, a nice detour, a straight shot through an empty town. The pavement was nice to walk on, but otherwise they must have only maintained a small portion of the place to keep it empty. A nice spot for an otherwise large outpost, the gas station at the town's edge. These guys were only trouble if they spotted you, otherwise they would leave you to it. The best way to avoid them is to largely just observe any of their abnormal behavior, and otherwise just act normal and ignore them. Just like swimming with sharks, a relatively easy task, only dangerous if they take notice, if they lock on. I looked at their arms as we walked by. We saw their black iron vehicles, not material but color. Nothing happened. No people showed themselves. We walked by the haunted house at the edge of town with no repercussions. Just a simple, seemingly empty small building with an ominous presence. Well maintained in comparison. Nothing to keep my attention for more than a minute after leaving my sight, a nice detour through a dead town. Day 3, or was it 4? Either way, we were quiet now. The puzzle had fallen together and I was the keystone. They adopted my attitude of keeping quiet. I felt bad again. I somehow forced it. The dialogue was oddly specific. Are you hungry still? No, not anymore. Are you sure? You need to make sure you eat enough. I'm doing fine. I actually feel kind of sick from eating too much these past few days. In that case, you shouldn't eat. Not to starve myself. She never meant that. I could tell by inflection and tone. Our bodies were finally acclimated to our adopted nomadic lifestyle. We would all either take our extended restroom break in the morning, afternoon, during the lunch stop, or at night. We had a couple timing issues the first couple days, with awkward stops. One person wandering into the woods while we executed. No big deal, just more time to be alive. Who's to say what's wasted or correctly used? What was it, a spectrum? The perfect use of time? The most wasteful. Either way, I was content with life. The way I was living was keeping me from becoming sick. The only real problem I had was the people holding me down. Unfortunately, I would be unsafe if all alone. We walked tired all day, passing a few crossroads, continuing the straight path, no matter how it wound. We made it to a metal bridge, crossing a deep-dug river, oddly narrow. We crossed, otherwise nothing interesting happened. When we reawoke the next day, we repeated the same process. A new dialogue took root between us, this time more hostile. I'm getting really sick of you hunched over your stomach not eating enough. She whispered this like a fucking serpent. I'm like this because I'm tired and cold. I've been eating too much also. I'm supposed to space out my intake, but instead I eat excessively 3 times a day. My digestion is speaking to me, hates me for my abuse. She didn't like that. I added the words abuse. I was smart enough to avoid a sour tone. I could still use my words as weapons. It was a double-edged attack. I was threatening her or complaining of abuse. I wasn't cognitively aware of my trickery. People who dissected interactions in real time were broken. I would pause a few moments later, forgetting the word choice, left eye up, popping into the back of my head, where the demon would blurt out terrifying words as it slept. Well, pausing nervously, have you tried maybe doing some stretches? That might help loosen up your stomach. No, I usually just wait and do the thing my body tells me to do. Thinking ahead and planning my action usually backfires for me. It was like she was talking to a total stranger now. She looked concerned and nervous. This was rare but common behavior. I could easily be impossible. She hummed a bit. My words needed dissecting, another trick to keep the people thinking clearly. Let me know if it gets any worse. We need to try and stay with the group, but we also don't want to get any worse. My eyes rolled back into my head in submission. I nodded, another defeat to her. I lost every day, part of my body and mind. All my emotions tossed to the sands of time. She found the threatening emotions in my person, pulled them out, and gave them back. She raped me with my own devil. A true menace. She seemed completely unaware of her sickening ways. Lost her head somewhere. No need to mention her composure. I would carry my emotional, psychological burden, as well as her, remaining hunched over my arms around my stomach, to the point of abdominal injury. Animals in a trap being harassed. Protecting my squishy soft belly in case of physical attack. I had no idea how bad it had gotten. I was being dramatic, but for the day I would walk behind her. She would peer back with looks of concern out in her mouth and between the lines of her face, but I could still see the satisfaction beside her eyes. Having trained a potentially dangerous animal to cover her, she could see the anger through my eyes. The kicker, the excitement of having an angry beast tailing her all day was ecstatic, just enough danger to keep her occupied and happy. On the other hand, I felt miserable and hurt, always when around her. Sometimes it wasn't important. Having something to work with continued could keep the demons away. Time alone brought them out. Devolving into that other world of wild animal, she kept me civilized. A frame of mind shift always helped. I was in pain, though. My head ached and I ignored it, conjuring negative thoughts. I walked all that way that day. What would be considered torture was held at bay by the rhythm of my footsteps. It distracted me. So the day turned into a forgotten nightmare, never to be recollected again. Not true. I would remember it as a day of walking, forgetting the pain, just like any other day. I would always forget the pain so long as I did something. That was all that mattered. If I did nothing, the pain would simply laying, standing, or sitting would never leave. A loss, really. The next day was more eventful. The 5th of 7. We were practically on a mountain. A pass, really. In between two mountains, walking towards a giant cliff face on a sheer, mountainous rock. A rock the size of a mountain, nearly immovable. And upon it was a cluster of mountain goats, violent in their energy, extremely powerful animals. A few came down to greet us. Their hourglass eye told only truths, painful in a way. Without hesitation, the first one charged. An odd move, the goat in the distance away from Joshua at front. He took a rifle carried around his back and took a hip shot, missing. While changing the head, the mover goat turned its head and took a maneuvering itself down, behind an assumed goat path. It was hidden behind rocks at trail's edge, safe from the rifle along with the other goats. They took off in various directions at the sound of gunfire. Crisis avoided, the only interesting event for the day. Day 6 was a nice change. My headache was gone with no morning dispute over how I should maintain my health. We found our groove, moving excitedly closer to the city. Climbing 9 distant hills, crossed a small mountain pass, potentially active volcano, seeing countless wooded streams and rivers. There we found an alpine lake. The road along water's edge, a near half circle around the lake. The water was far down, escaping through with the summer drought. Little snow remained from the winter melting down from the mountain above. The lake was difficult to see through trees and wasn't interesting, otherwise nice by being the water. It contained a lot of health, high enough up to avoid any real decay, down drifting into its centers. The lake was difficult to see across, pristine waters full through from the shoreline. I could tell by the flashes of light off the brief surface of the water's surfaces. The water along the coast was covered in lily pads and reeds, water grasses of various sorts and trees. These maintained the murky waters along the edges. Some spots were clear, usually rocky sections. We passed an old fishing cabin that someone nearby must have used. We would have missed it had it not stopped, wandering away to use the restroom. It was perched upon a rocky outreach like a lighthouse, something I saw and learned from magazines. It was distant. Luckily, Gary bought a spyglass. It contained a nice deck, wooden postings supporting the outreach, old fishing gear, buckets, rope, various useful things for living a fisherman's life were displayed before the overhang. Most of the gear was muddy and dirty, especially the buckets. No boat. The fisherman either left the day or otherwise fished from the shore. Either way, he was happy to have missed us, I could tell. We were opening carry and no one would be around to help him in case we were bad people. I believe that a separate woodland cabin existed as his home. He would need to use other sustenance besides fish. Maybe he had a vegetable garden. He must have trapped and hunted as well. A real universal fellow. We had no need to pursue any further. Settling down by the water, where the trail abandoned the lake edge, climbed back up another mountain. The whole lake was situated in a massive bowl of sandstone, granite maybe, sedimentary stone. We would walk over the mountain's edge another minor pass, to view the city below. We were situated in a crater beside the low-level lake containing 2 massive river mouths, one flowing in from the mountains, another exiting downstream. Assumedly this is where all the trash stemmed from, the city. I noticed a few distinct areas up from above, repeating, a large industrial zone situated in the ruin of an old city. Only the metal frames containing an original glass coat still remained intact. All else was missing. Most smaller metal pieces, concrete, and other glass panels were gone. Below the ominous structure, like spikes from the ground, a foundation was laid on top of collapsed building. Let it be known that the buildings had long since collapsed. The metal frames only raised a few stories from the ground. Ominous bumps existed, Building frames of collapsed towers incorporated, sprouted from the ground, much of which was coated in cheap concrete. A complex of factories, both enclosed part by warehouses and in the open existed with constructed heavily industrial cast iron parts. Vehicles on unpaved filthy roads. Smoke towers abundant. Soot, tar, and ash in excessive amounts of smoke poured from the sky. A real hell. Fevers of commotion, many moving parts, working together or adjacent. A real sick mess. Lake was used for something. Tubes, rotaries, runoff, and waste all entered the lake, performing functions. Mysterious how they obtained clean water. Maybe they extracted it upstream, where the inflowing river met the mouth of the lake.